The partition was a panel of stretched white canvas, and it divided the garden the way wealth has always divided things. Not with a wall, but with the polite suggestion that some people belonged on one side and the rest belonged on the other. Marcus Webb stepped through it at 11:17 on a Saturday night in late March, still carrying the smell of 11 hours behind a commercial grill. The event coordinator had asked him to come out and accept a thank you from the hosts. He had not wanted to. He came anyway, because it was the professional thing to do, and Marcus Webb had been doing the professional thing quietly and without recognition for long enough that it no longer required thought. The estate was called Harlan House. It sat on the north end of a long private road in Buckhead, and in the warm bulb light strung between the magnolias it looked like something arranged for people who had never once wondered whether the check would clear. A string quartet played near the stone balustrade. Champagne moved through the crowd on silver trays. The men wore the particular stillness of people who have stopped needing to prove anything. Marcus saw Diane first. She was standing near the fountain in a cream silk dress, one hand resting on the arm of a tall man in a charcoal suit. He recognized the man from a magazine cover. Preston Hale, 37 years old, managing director of Hale Capital Group, the largest private equity firm in the Southeast. Marcus stopped walking. He had not seen Diane Solis in 11 weeks. She had told him she needed space to think. She had told him the restaurant, the hours, the apron, all of it, was not what she had imagined for the rest of her life. She had been 23 when they met, in a night school business class in Decatur, with a spiral notebook and a hunger for a life larger than the one she had been handed. He had driven rideshare on his nights off so she could cover her licensing fees. He had co-signed her first office lease when the bank said no. He had held their daughter Nora alone through chest infections, while Diane flew to pitch rounds in Nashville and Charlotte, and he had told her every time she came home that she was going to make it. She had made it. Solis Property Group had closed its first 9-figure listing 14 months ago, and Diane's face had run in the Atlanta Business Journal under the headline she had described to him one night in 2017, lying on the floor of their kitchen, saying it out loud to hear how it sounded. He had been the only one in the room that night. He was not in the room for the photo. The coordinator walked Marcus forward and introduced him to the hosts. There was polite applause. Preston Hale shook his hand with the brisk courtesy of a man who has shaken 1,000 and remembers none. Marcus shook the hand. He was watching Diane. "You're engaged," he said. The garden quieted in pieces. The nearest guests turned first, then the ones beside them, the way a crowd goes still when it senses something real is about to happen in a place that has been carefully arranged to prevent it. Diane's smile did not move for a moment. Then it became the smile she used in rooms where she needed to appear composed while she decided what to do with the room. "Marcus." Her voice was low and tight. He did not raise his voice, he simply did not move. She set her glass on the fountain ledge. She straightened her spine the way she always had before walking into a room she intended to own. The quartet had stopped playing on its own. The only sound was the water in the fountain and the faint click of someone near the back, discreetly raising a phone. She said, loudly enough for the magnolia trees, "Everyone, I'm sorry for the interruption. This is Marcus Webb. He runs a small smokehouse over on Ponce de Leon. We used to know each other a long time ago." A few guests laughed the uncertain laugh of people performing ease they do not feel. Marcus said, "We didn't just know each other, Diane. We were together for 9 years. Nora is our daughter." The laughter stopped. Diane tilted her head. Her eyes were very bright, and the woman who had once wept in his car the night her first funding round collapsed was entirely gone from them. "Some people grow up together," she said, with the easy authority of someone addressing a room that has already agreed to believe her. "Some people just grow up. You are a man who will always be most comfortable behind a grill, Marcus. That is not an insult. It is simply who you are. It isn't who I am." Nobody in that garden spoke. Marcus looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded once, very slightly, the small, contained nod of a man filing something away inside himself. He turned around and walked back through the canvas partition to his station. He folded his apron. He told his line cook Terrell to finish the breakdown. He got into the van and drove home. It was past midnight when he reached the house on Kirkwood Avenue. Through the front window he could see the living room lamp they left on for Nora's sake, its small orange light steady in the dark. His mother-in-law, Bet, had been watching Nora tonight. He checked on Nora first. She was 6 years old and asleep on her back with her stuffed elephant, a gray plush animal she had named Harold, tucked under her chin. Harold was missing one button eye and had a small felt patch on his left ear where Diane had repaired a tear when Nora was 2. Nora had named him at 14 months, before she could say Marcus or Mama, and the name had stuck with the permanence that only early childhood produces. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to her breathe. Then he went to the kitchen and sat at the table in the dark and did not cry. He had used up that part of himself somewhere on the expressway coming home. The call came at 7:20 the following morning. Marcus was making Nora's breakfast: oatmeal with blueberries, a half glass of orange juice. Harold propped against the napkin holder so Nora could see him from the table. She arrived in her pajamas, climbed into her chair, looked at Harold, and said good morning to him before she said it to Marcus. He answered the call on the second ring. The man on the other end identified himself as Philip Carr, attorney for the estate of Roland Webb. Marcus stood very still at the counter with the wooden spoon in his hand. Roland Webb was a name from a single Thanksgiving when Marcus was 9 years old. A tall, angular man who had given him a folding pocket knife with a bone handle and looked at him a long time before disappearing into a black car before dinner was over. Roland was his father's older brother. He had left the family after a dispute Marcus was never given the details of, moved to Boston, and became in the silence a family myth. Philip Carr said that Roland had passed away 11 days ago from a long illness. He said Roland had named his nephew Marcus Webb of Atlanta, Georgia, as the sole heir to his estate. Marcus moved the oatmeal off the burner. Philip Carr said the number. The estate consisted of several private residences, 2 charitable foundations, and controlling ownership of Meridian Holdings, a privately held conglomerate with operations in commercial real estate, logistics infrastructure, and energy. Current audited valuation, $117 billion. Nora said, "Daddy, the oatmeal is ready." "I know, sweetheart," he said. "Give me 1 minute." He stood at the counter for 3 of them. Philip Carr said he would like to fly to Atlanta the following afternoon. Roland had left specific written instructions, and he believed Marcus should hear them before making any decisions. Marcus said yes and hung up, and stood in the kitchen while his daughter ate oatmeal with blueberries and talked to Harold about the day ahead. The lawyer arrived the next afternoon in a dark gray suit carrying a leather case that had been used enough to show it. They sat in the back corner of Webb's Smokehouse, the restaurant Marcus had opened on Ponce de Leon Avenue 7 years ago. The sign was painted by hand. The booths were recovered vinyl. The smell inside the walls had been there longer than the lease, and Marcus had never once considered that a problem. His counter-manager, Gloria Reese, who had worked for him 6 years and called him boss only when the health inspector came, brought 2 coffees and stayed out of earshot. Philip Carr laid 3 folders on the table and set a sealed envelope on top of them. "Before we go through the assets," he said, "your uncle asked me to read you this. He wrote it himself, about 8 months ago." He broke the seal and read aloud. The letter was not long. Roland Webb wrote that he had followed Marcus from a distance for many years, through channels he did not name. He wrote that he had built Meridian Holdings across 31 years, and that the building of it had cost him his marriage, his health, and the friendship of every man he had started with. He wrote that he was leaving everything to Marcus, not because Marcus was his blood, but because Marcus was the only person in his family who had spent a decade doing genuinely hard work for genuinely small rewards, and had not, as far as Roland could tell, become bitter about it. Then he wrote the condition. Marcus Webb would have 90 days. During those 90 days, he would be installed as chairman of Meridian Holdings with full executive authority and access to every account, every property, every contract. He could use them however he judged necessary. But if at any point during those 90 days he used the company's power to deliberately humiliate, ruin, or take revenge on another person, the inheritance would be revoked in its entirety. All assets would transfer to the two foundations. Marcus would walk away with nothing. The determination would rest with Philip Carr, acting as sole executor, based on conduct and not on outcome. The letter was direct on this point. Roland wrote that he did not care what Marcus did with the company, so long as he did not use it the way Roland had used it. The only wealth worth leaving, he wrote, was the kind that did not require you to become someone you would not recognize. Philip folded the letter and looked at Marcus across the table. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. Marcus looked at his own hands. The knuckles were rough from the grill the night before. He thought about Diane's voice in the garden, small and hard and certain. He thought about $117 billion and what a man could do in 90 days with that kind of weight in his hands. He set the contract on the table and told Philip he would meet him in the morning to sign. He signed at 8:15 on a Tuesday in a suite at the Georgian Terrace on Peachtree Street. By the time he walked to the elevator, he was chairman of a company with 37,000 employees. Philip handed him a company phone and a sealed envelope containing access credentials. He said the Meridian plane was at Fulton County Airport. He said the first board meeting was in Chicago the following morning. After that, Marcus would be on his own. The 90-day count would be silent. Philip would observe. Marcus went home first. He packed 2 suits he had bought for a cousin's wedding and a colleague's funeral. He packed a worn canvas duffel and the pocketknife his uncle had given him at 9 years old. He stopped at Bet's house on the way to the airport. Nora was in the backyard with Harold, conducting some kind of negotiation, with a circle of sticks arranged on the lawn. He crouched beside her and told her he had to go away for a while for work. She considered this with the gravity that 6-year-olds apply to information they are not sure they like. "Is Harold coming?" she asked. "Harold needs to stay here and keep an eye on things," he said. She handed Harold to Marcus very carefully. She said he should take Harold and bring him back, because Harold had never been on a plane before and it was time. Marcus put Harold in the front pocket of the duffel bag, with the elephant's gray head visible above the zipper. He kissed Nora on the top of her head and walked to the car without looking back. He knew if he looked back he would stay. The Meridian Holdings headquarters occupied 11 floors of a glass tower in the West Loop in Chicago. The man waiting for Marcus in the lobby was a senior vice president named Arthur Shen, who had served Roland for 17 years and had the stillness of someone who has watched a great deal of disorder without flinching. Arthur greeted him with the careful formality of a man choosing his first move. In the boardroom the following morning, 14 senior officers waited around a long table. Marcus introduced himself. He said he was there to listen before he was there to lead. He asked each of them to walk him through their division. Several did not bother to conceal their amusement. A man named Gary Fowler, the regional president for the Southeast portfolio, opened his laptop and kept it open for the first 3 hours. Marcus asked the kind of questions a man asks who has run a small business for 7 years and watched every dollar. He wanted to know where each division lost money it should not be losing. He wanted to know who made the decisions and who absorbed the consequences when they went wrong. The questions were not sophisticated. They were specific. So several officers' careers was insulating themselves with technical language found that Marcus's questions did not leave room for it. Gary Fowler did not look up from his laptop until the 4th hour, when Marcus asked him a direct question about the Southeast land inventory, and the room went quiet waiting for the answer. He answered badly. He did not open the laptop again. By the end of the first week, 2 divisional directors had quietly told financial reporters that the new chairman was, in the words of one unnamed source, a barbecue cook from Georgia who thought running a company was the same as running a lunch counter. The line ran in a trade publication the next morning. Marcus read it in the back of a car on the way to a financing review in Cincinnati. He did not respond. He went to the review, listened for 90 minutes, asked 3 questions none of the attorneys had raised, and closed the deal on terms that saved the company $4.5 million. Arthur Shen said nothing in the car afterward. He had stopped finding the cuff of Marcus's suit interesting somewhere around day 3. The weeks that followed settled into a routine Marcus kept regardless of which city he was working in. He woke at 5. He read the prior day's reports before the city came on. He took every meeting where the person across the table had already decided he was manageable. He called Nora every night at 7:30. Harold, apparently, had strong opinions about many things. In Atlanta, Diane Solis and Preston Hale were everywhere. Their engagement ran on the cover of Atlanta magazine. The waterfront South development, $200 million, south side of the city, was announced as the centerpiece of their shared vision. There was a photograph of Diane in a white blazer, laughing. In a sidebar interview, Diane said she had spent her career building security for herself and others. She said some people are meant to work with their hands, and some are meant to build the world those hands work in. The article did not mention Marcus. It did not need to. 3 days later, someone posted the video from the engagement party at Harlan House. 47 seconds, filmed from behind the fountain. The caption read, "She told him he'd always be a cook. Everyone should know what she didn't." 3 million views in 60 hours. Marcus watched it once, late at night in a hotel room in Charlotte. He set the phone face down on the desk and went back to reading a logistics contract. He never called anyone. He went to work. The Southeast Infrastructure Summit came 6 weeks into the 90 days. Every major developer in the region. The financial press down from New York. Preston Hale was scheduled to deliver the opening address and formally announce Waterfront South. Diane was in the 4th row when the lights came up. She wore a dark blue dress and the ring Preston had given her at Harlan House. The moderator, executive director of the Southeast Builders Association, walked to the podium and said she wanted to begin by acknowledging a new presence in the regional market. That Meridian Holdings had recently come under new leadership and that the incoming chairman was in attendance. She said his name. She asked him to stand. Marcus stood up from the back of the room. He was wearing the charcoal suit. It fit him now. He walked to the front, and the room tracked him with the attention of people who are rearranging older information to accommodate something new. Diane did not see him until he was halfway down the aisle. When she did, her hand closed on the program in her lap until the paper folded in half. Marcus stepped onto the stage and shook the moderator's hand. He thanked her. He said he was not there to speak at length. He learned more by listening. He said he had spent most of his career on the other side of rooms like this one. He sat down in the front row. He did not look at Diane. Preston Hale delivered the keynote with the ease of a man rehearsed for it. At the end of his remarks, with what appeared to be a casual impulse, he invited Marcus to say a word about the Waterfront South project, since, as he noted carefully, Meridian Holdings held controlling interest in 2 of the 3 parcels the development required. The room went quiet, in the way of rooms where something has just shifted, and not everyone has finished understanding what. Marcus stood up. He walked to the podium. He said the project had strong fundamentals, and that Meridian looked forward to seeing how the partnership developed. He had nothing further to add. He walked back to his seat. What happened in the next nights would be described in 3 separate financial publications over the weeks that followed. The men who understood what Meridian's land position meant stood first. 2 of them, men who had never treated Preston Hale as an equal, crossed the row to shake Marcus's hand. Then 3 more, then a row. Within 90 seconds, the front half of the room was on its feet. Preston was still at the podium. Diane had not moved. Her ring caught the light from the stage. The journalist 2 rows back who had filmed the Harlan House clip was filming this one. The caption posted that evening read, "The man she said belonged behind a grill. He owns the ground the building stands on. That night, 9 men who had been at the engagement party asked Marcus if he would consider letting them into his next acquisition. He thanked them. He said the company was not raising outside capital. He paid for everyone's dinner without comment. The flattery arrived in waves after that. Invitations to boards and clubs and charity tables. Marcus answered none of them. It was Arthur Shen who said something worth keeping. They were in the car coming back from a site review in Savannah. Arthur said, without looking over, that the last 5 weeks had been the most coherent period in his memory at the company, not because of any single decision Marcus had made, but because Marcus had not yet begun to believe what people in these rooms were saying about him. The day Marcus started believing it, he said, was the day the work would stop being real. Marcus said nothing. He thought about that conversation until Savannah disappeared behind them. Preston Hale did not call. Preston Hale investigated. The research firm returned a thin file within a week. It flagged one thing. The Waterfront South development required 3 land parcels, and Meridian Holdings controlled 2 of them. Without those parcels, the permits could not issue. Without the permits, the financing collapsed inside 120 days. Preston read the file twice. He understood that Marcus Webb could end the Hale Group's flagship development with a single phone call. He told Diane none of this. Diane came to the tower in Chicago on the 71st day. She did not call ahead. She gave her name at the lobby security desk and asked to see the chairman. Marcus was in the middle of a call with his logistics director when the front desk reached him. He sat at his desk for a long time before he told reception to send her up. She came through the office door in a dark coat with her hair down and no ring on her finger. She said she had been wrong. She said that fear of ending up back where she started had made her do things she could not take back. She said she had thought about what she said in that garden every day since the night she said it. She knew what the land situation imprints project, and she was not there to ask Marcus to save it. She was there to ask him to take her back. Marcus sat very still, looking at her across the room. He felt, for the first time since he had signed Philip's documents, the full weight of what he had become. He could end them. He could save them. He could do either thing with a single call, and Diane would stand beside him through either choice and call it love. He thought about Nora handing him Harold at the gate, saying the elephant had never been on a plane and it was time. He told Diane he needed until morning. She nodded. She left. He sat in the office until the city went from evening to night, to the deep blue of 3 in the morning, when the street's empty and the only sound is the ventilation system. He took Roland's letter from his coat pocket. He had been carrying it for 71 days. The paper had gone soft along the creases. He read the line about staying kind when you were rich. He read the line about the only wealth worth leaving. He thought about what Roland had meant when he wrote that he had never made peace with the world he had built. Roland had built the company. The company had built someone Roland no longer recognized in the mirror. The letter was not a will. It was a warning. He called Philip at 7 in the morning and told him the meeting that would settle. Everything would take place the following Monday at Meridian's regional office in Atlanta. By Sunday evening, the parking structure of the Atlanta office tower was full of cars that had not been there on Friday. Word had moved through the industry the way it moves when it carries consequences. Preston's board had been told that a single counterparty held the future of Waterfront South. He had not named Marcus. He had not needed to. Preston arrived at 9:50 in a dark suit with a single folder and sat without opening it. Marcus walked in at 10 o'clock with Arthur behind him. Philip Carr was already at the far end of the table, with a legal pad in front of him and a pen resting on top of it. He never wrote anything down. He was not there to record. He was there to watch. The room was quiet for almost a full minute before Marcus spoke. He said he understood that Waterfront South was structured against Meridian's 2 parcels. He said his team had confirmed that without those parcels the permits could not be issued and the financing would collapse within 120 days. He said he could end the project and with it the Hale Group's capacity to operate as a going concern, with a single document. Preston did not argue. He nodded once. He said he had not come to contest the facts. He had come to ask what Marcus was going to do. Marcus looked at him across the table for a long moment. He thought about the garden and Diane's small, hard smile and the laughter that had started and then stopped. He thought about $117 billion and the specific, quiet pleasure of making this man understand, in the next 30 seconds, what it felt like to stand on the wrong side of a white canvas partition. Then he thought about Roland's letter. About Harold in the duffel pocket, gray head visible above the zipper, riding to a plane for the first time because Nora had decided it was time. He told Preston he was going to transfer the 2 parcels at the price they had been assessed at 3 years ago, before the market ran, on a clean transfer with no riders and no conditions attached. He said Meridian was doing the deal because the project was structurally sound and because the housing and jobs it would produce were good for the city, and the city was where he intended to keep living. He said he was not doing it as a gesture toward Preston. He was not doing it for any reason that had anything to do with Preston. Then he said that after the transfer closed, Meridian Holdings would not do business with the Hale Group again, while Preston ran it. Preston sat for a long time without moving. When he spoke, his voice was thinner than it had been when he walked in. He said he understood. He said if their positions had been reversed, he was not confident he would have done the same. He said he was sorry, in the specific way of a man who is only beginning to understand the size of what he is sorry for. He stood up, picked up the folder he had never opened, and left. Arthur Shen remained at the door after he went. He said, in the quiet that followed, that he had not been certain until this morning what kind of man he was working for. He said he was certain now. Marcus said nothing. He stood at the window and watched the parking structure below as the black cars began to leave. Diane was in the corridor when he came out of the conference room. She had come after all. Preston had walked past her in the hall without looking up. She crossed the corridor when she saw Marcus. She said she had heard. She said she did not understand. She said any person in that building would have done it without a second thought, that she would have stood by him through every minute of it. She asked why he had not. Marcus looked at her in the white morning light coming through the corridor window. He thought, with a clarity that surprised him by its lack of heat, that he had loved her for most of a decade, and it had taken him most of a decade to see her completely. Not the version he had carried in his mind. Not the woman with the borrowed coat and the notebook full of plans. The one standing in front of him now, for whom love had always been, at its core, a form of utility. He told her she had answered her own question. He told her she had said she would have stood beside him through it. And that was exactly the difference between the man she thought she had come back to and the man who actually existed. He told her he was not coming back. He said it without anger. He said it without the cruelty he had spent 73 days choosing not to use. He wished her well, and he meant it in the way a man can mean something that no longer costs him anything to feel. Then he walked past her down the corridor to the elevator. Philip Carr was waiting in the lobby. They walked together to the parking structure. Philip had made his determination several days earlier. He had practiced law for 28 years and had learned that the way a man behaves when no one is watching is identical to the way he behaves when someone is. Marcus Webb had been consistent from the morning he signed the documents to this moment. Philip told him, at the car, that the 90 days were not yet finished, but the inheritance was secure. He said the foundations had been notified, that the assets would not be passing to them. He said the remaining days were, in his judgment, a formality. He shook Marcus's hand and left. That evening, alone in his hotel suite, Marcus read Roland's letter one final time. He did not know whether his uncle would have called the day a success. He thought eventually that Roland had not framed the question that way. The question had only ever been whether the man reading the letter was still the man who could read it. He called Nora at 7:30. She reported that Harold had arrived at a settled opinion about the neighbor's cat, and communicated this with appropriate gravity. The next morning he drove east across the city to Ponce de Leon Avenue. The sign outside Webb's Smokehouse had been cleaned while he was away. Gloria had done it herself, she said, because it had been bothering her for 2 years, and this had seemed like the right occasion. The booths were still the same vinyl. The smell inside the walls was the same. Terrell was already at the prep station. The morning light came through the front window at the angle it always had. Marcus took off his suit jacket and hung it on the hook by the back door. He tied on an apron. He started the brisket. Gloria watched him from the front counter for a moment. Then she went back to the opening routine without saying a word. She had figured most of it out from the financial news. The rest she did not need to know. The parcels transferred within the week. Waterfront South moved forward. The story moved slowly through the financial press across the months that followed. The inheritance, the 90-day clause, the land signed over at 3-year-old prices, the terms of a decision that could not be entirely explained through the language the financial press usually used. A long piece ran in the Wall Street Journal in September. Marcus declined to be interviewed. He read it once and put it in the drawer beside the pocket knife his uncle had given him when he was 9. Preston Hale stepped down 8 months later. The company was restructured. Diane Solis closed Solis Property Group the following year and moved to Savannah. She gave no interviews. Marcus installed Arthur Shen as chief executive and pushed the day-to-day decisions into the divisions. The officers who had laughed in the first board meeting were given a choice when their contracts came up. 4 stayed, 10 left. Gary Fowler was not among the 4. He established 2 funds through Meridian's foundation arm. The first was a low-interest loan program for independent restaurants in cities, where rents were outrunning revenue. Loans made without collateral, on the strength of 3 years of tax returns and a conversation with the owner. The second was a hardship fund for families in the service trades industries navigating the loss of a spouse. It paid out quietly and published no names. He put neither his name nor Roland's on the funds. He named them after the street where he had started. The Ponce Foundation made its first grants in September. By the end of the following year, it had reached 4,011 families, and nearly none of them knew who had signed the checks. On Saturdays when he was in Atlanta, Marcus still worked the grill at Webb's. Same apron, same steel barrel. The line at the door stretched to the end of the block by noon. He took no reservations. He served everyone in the order they arrived. Nora turned 7 in the spring. She came to the restaurant every Saturday morning and sat at the counter with Harold, giving him a detailed orientation to the day's menu and explaining, carefully, the significance of different wood in the smoker. Marcus answered her questions and Harold's, indiscriminately, without preference. A journalist from a national food magazine came down in the second year and asked Marcus, off the record, whether he ever thought about Diane Solis. Marcus said no. He said the man she had addressed in the garden that night had not really been him, and the man she had come to see in Chicago had not been him either. He said he was not angry about it anymore. He was sorry sometimes, for both of them. The kind of sorrow that does not require the other person to have done anything differently, because the story was never really about the other person at all. The journalists who wrote about him in the years after mostly wrote the same sentence in different arrangements. That the wealthiest man in the room was usually the one you would not notice until the 4th question. What none of them quite found the words for was the simpler thing underneath all of it. A man is not measured by what he takes from the people who took from him. He is measured by what he refuses to take when he finally has the power to take everything. The man who walks out of the kitchen the same way he walked in is the only kind of rich man worth becoming. This is a work of fiction. All names, characters, companies, institutions, and events portrayed in this story are entirely fictional and are the product of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or to actual events or organizations is purely coincidental. This story was created for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, and share it with someone who has ever been underestimated. Every week, we tell the stories of the people the world walked past too quickly. They were worth stopping for.